Thank you. So, the smooth and efficient flow of cases through an inpatient surgery center is critical to the physical well-being of patients, and at least in the United States, to the financial well-being of the institution. Most time things do go smoothly, but that's by no accident. It's a tightly planned and choreographed event with multiple safety checks in place, much like that of the aerospace industry. Part of that planning involves decisions around how best to utilize our operating room space to get patients to the right place at the right time. Surgery is a high-risk area for patients, but with adequate planning, we can mitigate that risk. The project I'm here to tell you about today is how we use process mining to improve how one of those decisions was made, and that was how to allocate operating room space to certain specialty services for their unscheduled, urgent, and emergent add-on cases. First, I'm from Madison, Wisconsin. Madison is a city in the state of Wisconsin located in the Midwestern United States. It's about a 2-hour drive northwest of Chicago. And it was about a 9-hour flight to get here. It's the capital of the state of Wisconsin and the site of a major research university. Its population is similar in size to Eindhoven. UW Health is where I work. It's a large academic medical center associated with the University of Wisconsin. In total, there are 7 hospitals in Wisconsin and Illinois and 87 outpatient clinics. The Madison campus is shown here, and that includes our Children's Hospital and University Hospital. University Hospital is where the project took place. It's that brown cluster of buildings on the top of the picture. University Hospital is a 520-bed trauma level 1 referral center, meaning we have some of the sickest patients in the state and surrounding area. At UW, I'm a Nursing Informatics Specialist. We serve as the bridge between the clinical staff and information technology. I've been in my role for the last 5 years. Prior to that, I provided direct patient care as a nurse and nurse practitioner for 25 years. As a Nursing Informatics Specialist, I support surgery, and so that was the focus of the project. So, surgery, to better understand the problem, it's helpful to understand how surgery works. And sometimes it's sort of a mystery area to even healthcare professionals that work in the hospital but outside of surgery. So, first off, most cases are scheduled and elective. They're planned in advance. Patients typically arrive from their place of residence and are admitted directly into our pre-op area to streamline the admitting process. There, they're prepared for surgery. They're asked to arrive 2 hours before their scheduled case to give us time to prepare the patient. IV could be started, their pre-op checklist, anything that's needed to get the patient ready for surgery. In the meantime, the room is being set up. All the necessary equipment, supplies, instruments are brought into the room. When the patient is ready and the room is ready, the patient's transferred to the operating room where there are some additional steps to prepare the patient for surgery. Once everything is set up, surgery begins. Surgery typically lasts 2 to 4 hours. After that, the patient is transferred to the recovery room where they are stayed and closely monitored until they're stable to transition to the next phase of care, which is usually for inpatient surgery to one of the inpatient units. In the meantime, that same room is being turned over. It's being cleaned and set up for the next case. So at University Hospital, we have 27 ORs, so this is all happening simultaneously. So it takes a great amount of collaboration, teamwork, coordination, planning to make this all come together. But there's another type of case that is unplanned, unscheduled, usually those emergent urgent cases. Those patients arrive through our emergency department generally. We have set aside certain rooms for some of those types of cases so that we can accommodate those patients quite quickly. The room can be set up, and as soon as the patient is ready, the team is ready, surgery can begin. So we have this happening simultaneously with arrivals through the pre-op area and our emergency department. Sometimes we have too many cases, emergent cases, that we can accommodate rooms for. So in that case, we need to do some juggling of our schedule. We may have to delay some of our scheduled cases to either later in the day or the next day. We call that the cases bumped. We try to avoid this. This causes it increases the risks, increases the costs, and so we would like to be able to better plan for all of those urgent cases coming in. This is how it looks on the OR schedule. The cases in blue are our scheduled cases. Generally, our OR schedule is quite booked for the day with scheduled cases. The brown-colored block is that one of those cases that came in through the emergency room that we were able to accommodate quite quickly. These are our add-on cases. They're added to our virtual add-on room, and when we can accommodate them, they're moved and juggled onto the schedule. Sorry, I need water. Sorry about that. Okay. So, I just wanted to compare this to a restaurant, just to kind of explain this a little better. So, most restaurants require a reservation in advance to be seated in the restaurant. So when customers arrive at their appointed time, they can be seated pretty much immediately without waiting. These are our scheduled cases. There's another type of customer that doesn't have a reservation. Some restaurants set aside certain rooms for walk-in customers, and so those customers can also be accommodated quite quickly and be seated without waiting. So that's an example of our add-on cases with dedicated hold rooms. We have a place for them to go. Some customers without reservations need to wait for a table to open up. This is a little different in our situation, in where we may need to have scheduled patients wait until later in the day or the next day. Some customers without reservations are turned away, no matter how hungry they are. We try to avoid this. There's rare instances where we may divert patients to other hospitals, but we try to avoid that. So just to review the problem, we'll be adding 2 additional OR rooms that will create some additional space for add-on cases. Some specialty services like trauma and cardiovascular already have dedicated space allocated for their add-on cases. Neurosurgery and peripheral vascular are services that don't have allocated space. Neurosurgery has made a strong political campaign for all the available space that will become available. However, peripheral vascular is also voicing a need. So this is the question that our operational leaders are faced with. So our project looked at how best to allocate that operating room space that would become available. how the project was organized. So it included the operational leaders of the surgical area. Those were our directors from anesthesia, our surgeon group, and nursing. They were the sponsors of the project and provided any support and were actively involved. We also had a data analyst that had direct access to the databases and so completed the data extraction and formatted the data for input into the process mining tool. We worked very closely together, very collaboratively, very iteratively. I completed the process mining analysis and any details of the project management. We also had a reference group that we went to. We couldn't always answer all the questions within our group, so we would go outside to get those answered. Those might have included the charge nurses, the schedulers, or others that were more expert on the database, the tables, and the fields. We also had support from Fluxicon. Anna was very helpful and served as our process mining expert to answer any questions and give advice, which was very instrumental. So we had some questions that we wanted to answer to help with the decision making. First off, how many add-on cases without dedicated hold rooms are we talking about? What's the volume? How are these broken out by specialty service and day? Are there higher volume specialty services and days? And how are our patients moving through the perioperative process? Are we meeting our performance metrics? So, to help answer our question, we extracted data from the database. The activities pretty much mirrored the steps I walked you through. Sorry. And their associated timestamps and the surgical case ID. That was enough to generate the process model. But to help answer our questions, we also needed to pull in additional fields. Many of these were extracted directly from the database. For example, when a case is requested, there's a field to indicate if it's an add-on case or not. What we found, though, was that this was unreliable since it required human intervention to always remember to check this. So we found that it wasn't always capturing all of our add-on cases. So what we did was we created the logic to flag the cases to capture all of those that met the operational definition. And so we added that to the event log. So that gave us data on all the inpatient surgical cases for 1 year. Since we were interested in the add-on cases, we created another view and then filtered that just for the add-on cases so that we could look more closely at those. Then also, since we were interested in those add-on cases without dedicated hold rooms, we applied another filter to isolate those. So there are certain services that I mentioned that already have dedicated hold rooms. Those are trauma, cardiovascular, and transplant, and our general and acute care surgeons. So we filtered those out. From that, we were able, from all of this data, we were able to get an overall case distribution. How many scheduled cases versus scheduled elective, not scheduled in advance, and our add-on, our unscheduled in advance cases. What we found that 70% cases were scheduled, and that's what we would expect, that most cases are scheduled in advance. We also found that 30%, though, were unscheduled, which is pretty significant. 12% of the cases were the cases that we don't have dedicated hold rooms. And so those are the ones that were fitting into the schedule, causing disruption. So how can we better plan for those? Another question we had was how this broke out by service and day. What we found was that neurosurgery and peripheral vascular were the two highest volumes. And this is what we were expecting to see. These were the services that were vying for space and voicing the most concern and dissatisfaction with timely access to the OR. There was also another service that had a high volume, but we had already had a plan for shifting some of these cases. So next we looked at the flow of patients through the perioperative process. How well were we doing in terms of getting the patients to the operating room at the right time? We were particularly interested in looking at from when the case was added to the schedule to when the patient was in the OR. This is expanded about 30%. So there's various flows that the patient can take. For example, the case could be added on to the schedule before the patient's even in the hospital. So what we found was that on average, we were getting our patients to the room in about 6 hours, which could be okay for some patients, but not for all. So not all cases are the same urgency. Our elective and semi-elective cases are usually more those cases that are scheduled in advance, and that comprise the smallest percentage of our total. We were more interested in those emergent and urgent cases at 97%, and those are more time sensitive in terms of getting the patient to the operating room to prevent harm. So by adding the case priority as an activity, we are able to bucket out those levels of urgency and examine each one. I've just brought out an example of the emergency cases, and we found that we were on average getting the patient to the OR in about 69 minutes, which is pretty good. So then we looked at that for neurosurgery and peripheral vascular. We found similar times around an hour, give or take, which is still pretty good. But it's not always helpful to just look at the averages. We are also interested in what the outliers were. Where were we failing and where could we do better? So we applied the performance filter to just look at those cases that were taking longer than an hour to get to the OR. And in this example, that comprised like 43% of the cases, so pretty significant. Then we compared that for neurosurgery and peripheral vascular, looking at their cases that were taking over an hour. Naturally, our averages bumped up to 2 hours for neuro and about an hour and 45 minutes for peripheral vascular. And then here we're also seeing too the much larger volume for peripheral vascular. So even though neurosurgery had been vying for all the space and were in line to receive it, we were also really seeing a strong need for our peripheral vascular service line. So, and then what we did too, what was really helpful in the tool was just to drill down into each of those cases that were taking longer. And with the other attributes that we pulled in, we were able to really look at where we were falling short and how could we do better. So, the outcome was that the space and equipment for that space, since it wasn't just the space alone, It's all the equipment that goes into the room so that you can do particular kinds of cases. That was allocated to neurosurgery and peripheral vascular. So the decision was different, and it was made differently. The value of process mining was that it reduced the political and emotional components. We were looking at the data. What was the data telling us? It wasn't just who had more power or influence. The visualization within the tool enabled and helped build more confidence in the data. We could drill down into those cases and look where everything was coming from. Sometimes when you're just presented with graphs, it's hard to see where all those numbers came from and really validate it. It also told the story more easily. Just the flow diagrams, the statistics, just made it easier to understand and follow. One of the operational leaders told me that without process mining, it wouldn't have been possible to make the case to the C-suite and our facilities planning. So, while this project was successful, it took me about 2 years to get to this point. First off, it was a lengthy review process. Just to get the tool downloaded onto my laptop took months. Also, timely access to data. Certain groups within our organization hold on to the data, and so you're placed in a queue for access to data. So that was a real impediment. Another was, in the beginning, lack of active sponsorship. So while there was interest, it was from a distance. And so there was no real support, allocation of resources to really develop process mining as a competence for the department or organization. So everything sort of floundered from there. There was no real focus or direction. More people just kept being added, which never solves the problem. So how we succeeded. So number one, I was persistent. I believed in the technology, and I wanted it to work. So I gained the support of surgical services. They were interested in the technology. They went out on their own and learned more about it. They saw the value of it, and they supported it. And such, they were interested in it succeeding as I was. So we were very disciplined in terms of the project that we selected. We wanted the complexity to be manageable, but yet have something that was valuable to the organization. So, and the team was organized specifically for this project. It wasn't just including everyone from the organization that was interested. So everyone had a role. And that was my story. Questions?
Thanks a lot for sharing this. I will start off with the first question. Okay. And if for those of you who have questions, you can already raise your arms. We will get to them in a moment. I'm curious, in the beginning when you were showing the kind of data that you had, right? You showed you had the main process mining data that was there, we had the timestamp, the case ID, the activity, but then there were a lot of attribute fields. Yes. And you pointed out that one of the important attribute fields was this field indicating whether the case was an add-on case or not. Yes. And you explained that initially it looked like that data field was there, but then in the end it turned out it was actually not reliable because people had to manually tick this, and so it wasn't always in the right mode. So you ended up not being able to use this, and you artificially or by yourself created an attribute that was reliable. So I was curious whether you could explain how did you derive and create this reliable add-on case attribute?
Okay, so what we did was we created a query in SQL to flag the cases that met that operational definition. So we actually looked at when the case was added to the schedule, if it was It was very specific. After 5 o'clock the day before or the day of. That was when the schedule was closed. So it was difficult to do that in the tool, but we were able to do that in SQL.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Who has another question for Fran?
Okay. Can you hear me?
A little bit closer, maybe.
Okay. I'm curious how you became aware of process mining, whether this was your first project actually, and what the plans are. Okay,
yes. I first was introduced to process mining by my significant other, Bob Wertz. He had completed the online course and came to me and he said, "Hey, I think you should really see this. I think it would really apply to what you do." And so I completed the course too, and I thought, wow, this is really great. It's like, why isn't everyone doing this? It just seems so like it makes sense. And so that's how I got started. And I went to my director with the idea. And like I said, it was a little shaky because there's not really a plan for how to implement innovative technology. So it was just kind of a process. And then your other question. If this was our plans.
Can you repeat the question?
Yes, the plans are actually to dig more into this process model that we had generated, because we were also interested in like some of the upstream and downstream effects. So while we have some delays within our own area, it impacts up and down. So we were going to examine those more closely. We also, I'm interested in applying this to some of our technology. I support also our nurse call system, which is much more than I ever thought it was. I thought it's just this button that you call the nurse, but actually you press the button and people are paged, and there's many things that can go wrong through this process, so I thought that would be a good thing to apply it to.
Thank you for the nice presentation. I was wondering if you had any problem with the timestamps, because normally if the analysis is in clinical domain and healthcare,
yes,
the timestamps are not that much reliable because a lot of things happens outside the system.
Yes.
And that was the first question. And how did you deal if there was a problem with the timestamp?
Yeah.
Another question is that did you also use the data that is generated by the devices used in the operational room? And how did you include that in the event log?
Yeah. We didn't use any data from any of the equipment in the room.
Yeah.
We used some of the timestamps from the action of when the case was added to so it was sort of something that happens in the system that's not input by the user. So we had a combination of two things, input by the user and then things that were behind the scene. In terms of timestamps, there were some issues. Actually, it wasn't too bad, actually. I was a little surprised. I was kind of fearing that part. But there were some fields that only had like a time or a date. Yeah. So we were fortunate that data's captured in so many ways that we had other options that we could augment that with.
All right. Thank you.
Who else has a question?
Thank you. Thank you for the talk. It's very inspiring. May I ask what happened after allocating this additional space and equipment to the two types of the surgeries? Is there any before and after analysis to see how effective this analysis is?
Yes, we plan to do the analysis again to see. It will be very interesting. I'm curious to see the results.
Okay, thanks.
Any more questions for Fran? There, Lucy.
Hello. Are you planning to use process mining for monitoring the change you made? By continuously monitoring,
yes.
I mean?
Yes, absolutely.
Because that's difficult.
Yes, because that happens with a lot of projects where you implement something but it's not sustained. And so, yes, very cognizant of that fact.
No more questions for Fran? Okay, then let's thank her once more. Thanks so much.